CBS News foreign policy and national security contributor. H.R. McMaster is also a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General who served as the 25th National Security Advisor of the United States. So glad to see you. So this is not, the Joe Biden of September when he said that if China was to attack Taiwan, of course the U.S. would defend Taiwan, and then his spokespeople had to sort of walk it back. Much more measured and careful about his approach to Taiwan and other issues connected to China.
Yes, and Maria, and it's clear that he's prepared well for this. I think it's important for these summits to use the right language, to use the right phrase, and to avoid certain phrases as well. So I'm sure there were a number of prep sessions with the National Security Advisor and others to ensure that he spoke consistent with longstanding U.S. policy on Taiwan and on other issues as well.
So, General, one of the things that he made clear is that he doesn't believe, in his estimation, that China will make any kind of military moves towards Taiwan. And I know, having been in briefings with several members of the United States military throughout the course of the last couple of years, that they do believe that China is a sleeping dragon. In other words, we need to be aware of their capabilities and their machinations. But this is the clearest, I think, that the president has ever been about his sentiment towards Xi Jinping and the possibility of any kind of military incursion into Taiwan. What did you make of that?
Well, I think it's important, especially if the president said, hey, listen, there's no way that you can accomplish your objectives on Taiwan vis-a-vis Taiwan through the use of force at an acceptable cost to you. And the cost would be exorbitant militarily, I think, to China. I think China hopefully is learning the lessons of Russia's failed offensive in Ukraine to recognize, hey, it's not that easy to attack across 150 miles of what is often a stormy Taiwanese strait to try to subsume territory the size of Maryland, which is quite mountainous in the east, as you're showing. And then, of course, the population is concentrated on the west side of the island, across the strait from China, in dense urban areas. There are mud flats. The Taiwanese military is becoming more and more capable. And of course, the logistics challenges of sustaining an offensive like that are immense. I think what we have to be concerned about, Vlad, is our actions really short of a full-out invasion in China's efforts to coerce Taiwan and to achieve annexation below the threshold of a full-out invasion. We saw a little bit of a dress rehearsal for that almost after Speaker Pelosi's visit and the pseudo-blockade under the guise of military exercises and live fire exercises that China conducted.
So the expectations for the meeting between these two men was pretty low, but as I understand it, they spoke for hours. So obviously a good conversation was had. Historically, sort of China and the U.S., they have been at odds in some areas, but they have worked together in other areas. Where do you see areas of cooperation for both countries?
Hey, I'll tell you, Marie, I don't think it looks very good. I mean, there are some areas for sure. How about food security, right? I think China, is struggling probably at this moment to feed its own people. And of course, that relates in large measure to Russia's continued brutalizing of Ukraine, and cutting off a huge part of the world's supply chains. How about energy security? How about trying to get economic growth going again? The Chinese leadership has done really a great job at killing their economy with a crackdown on the tech sector, the zero COVID policies. So I think that the Chinese Communist Party is under immense pressure. And I'm hoping that the President Biden went in there knowing that he's in a position of extraordinary strength, I think, at this moment, given the degree to which China, through its own unwise policies and through Chinese aggression since the pandemic. I mean, Emery, it's really important, I think, to look at some of the content of this wolf warrior diplomacy to see how aggressive China has been in undermining, the U.S. and attacking the U.S., but also supporting Russia in its brutal offensive against the Ukrainian people, with just parroting all the Russian disinformation and so forth. You've had campaigns of economic coercion against Australia, against Lithuania. You've had physical aggression in the South China Sea, ramming and sinking Vietnamese vessels. They have these hundreds of vessels, this maritime militia that they're using to occupy reefs and to weaponize islands in the South China Sea. They've bludgeoned Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier. So, Emery, I just think that this is a moment at which the world is starting to realize, hey, we have a problem. And I think the choice is no longer between Washington and Beijing. It's between sovereignty and servitude. So I think the United States, the free world's in a strong position on these dialogues, Anne-Marie, and these efforts to get the dialogues going. Mm-hmm. I would be skeptical about it. I would be very skeptical about it because I think what the Chinese Communist Party wants, what Xi Jinping wants, is he wants to lull us back into complacency. These sustained economic dialogues, the sustained security dialogues, I mean, it makes you feel good a little bit. You're talking. But really what the Chinese Communist Party has done really well is hold out the prospects of new policies, hold out the prospects of reform, so we won't compete effectively. So I hope we maintain our resolve, and I think the Biden administration should get a lot of credit. On export controls involving semiconductors, for example. I hope we continue these very important competitive policies.
So, General, before we let you go, let me ask you, just jumping off on something you just said, the choice that other nations have when it comes to the United States and China. I wonder, are we still competitive with countries that, yes, big picture, they perhaps would want to be in the sphere of influence that the United States offers, but you know how things work in Washington, where we're the most divisive we've ever been in our nation's history, and sending money or material to other countries that are not necessarily strategic in our strategic interest is something that Washington struggles to do. So if you're a poor country and China is offering to build your roads and offering to provide you with medical equipment and medical supplies and to help heal your people, and the United States is just there to offer freedom, as opposed to what you said, servitude, it makes it very hard for a world leader to say, yeah, I'll take that freedom while my people are suffering and struggling, whereas China is offering real change that just means that I can't be in your camp anymore. So my question is, how competitive are we in that regard? We used to be very competitive during the Cold War that we had with the Soviet Union when we would do those things for those countries. We rebuilt Germany and we rebuilt Western Europe. But how are we doing now when it comes to that particular aspect of this relationship?
I'll tell you, Vlad, I think we're really competitive because, what we do is we help countries build their own institutions in countries where people want to say and how they're governed, in countries that want rule of law. We have very effective assistance programs. Now, you have to have a willing partner locally. And what China does very well is export its authoritarian mercantilist model to other authoritarian regimes. I mean, to Zimbabwe, to Cambodia, to Laos. I mean, they have a very strong grip in those countries because they are also helping them with their technologically enabled police state that China has established internally. And also, Vlad, I think a lot of countries now are realizing, hey, when you get aid from China, it's not aid, it's loans. And these are debt traps, and there are strings attached. And there are all these non-transparent agreements. Like, a lot of the debt can be immediately recalled if you even criticize the Chinese Communist Party, who, by the way, is, committing genocide in Xinjiang, for example, and employing slave labor. So I think we're in a very competitive advantage, especially when you look at the degree we can use our free market economic system and investments that actually get a return on investments. A lot of these Chinese infrastructure projects, I mean, they're designed to establish that debt trap, to dump a lot of overproduced Chinese goods into those economies, to use Chinese companies, Chinese banks for the loans, Chinese labor, right? So it's not a good deal. And in a lot of countries, you have a great deal of pushback now. You've seen that in Ecuador, for example, a really dramatic rejection of the economic relationship China and financial relationship China established. In Kenya, just in recent days, there have been actions by lawmakers there and a lot of coverage in the press about the predatory nature of these economic and financial arrangements. In the U.S., what we bring investment that will get returns on investment, and our loans back projects where local people are employed. Same thing with Japan and the rest of the free world. Japan's investment, for example, across the Indo-Pacific region is much larger than China's investment. And so I think it's what's important is to pull the curtain back on a lot of these Chinese loans under it's called the One Belt One Road project, and show what's happening. You know, a lot of the infrastructure that's been built is now crumbling. You know, and then these countries are indebted for many generations now, and this is really a way that China's trying to actually gain coercive influence, create servile relationships. I mean, I think you could even call it kind of a new form of colonialism. So whereas in the global South, you really, you know, a lot of times there's a rejection of, you know, the West broadly because of the legacy of colonialism. I think a lot of countries in Africa, you know, in our hemisphere, are beginning to realize that this is kind of a new form of colonialism that China's exporting.
Fascinating insight,
really
as
interesting.
always. General H.R. McMaster, thank you, sir, for joining us at the last minute. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Great to be with both of you. Take care.
Thank you.